I can tell you with certainty that most of you who are listening to this will have had an imaginary friend. A friend you made up because you needed someone or something to play with and cure everyday boredom. These friends range extremely differently from one person to another. Most people who had imaginary friends describe them as human-like with characteristics that describe their own personality. However, no matter how hard you try, making anyone else believe that your imaginary friend is real is near impossible. No one except you truly understands and believes your imaginary friends. When I was maybe 5 or 6, I started kindergarten. Not many of the other kids there would talk to me, and I would not start a conversation due to my shy nature. I went through kindergarten having no friends and not enjoying anything about my upcoming years of education. It wasn't until the beginning of the first grade that I met Nick. Nick was the first person to talk to me, later explaining that his imaginary friend Eric had wanted us to meet each other. As Nick and I became better friends, he would talk to me about Eric, translating his words and emotions so that we could have a conversation. As a kid, I thought that talking to Eric was like a game, and the rules were made up by Nick. After a couple of weeks, I became more attuned to Eric's personality, and Nick no longer had to translate what he would say. It became more like talking to a real person. As second grade came, Nick had to leave. Because of his absence, I no longer had any friends, so I decided that I could have an imaginary friend like Eric. Soon, I had created Greg, my new friend. My parents soon became accustomed to Greg, seeing him as a silly game. Before long, I had a bond with Greg almost like that of Nick and Eric. However, Greg was more like me. Every day, I would go out with Greg and we would run around the yard and do normal childhood stuff, like throwing rocks into a pond and exploring the woods. As I went further into life, around 4th grade, I soon made real friends. My interactions with Greg became less frequent. When I would be with my friends, I would imagine Greg in the distance, sad and alone, but I still did not talk with him. In middle school, my thoughts of Greg were completely erased. All time I spent was either by myself or with friends doing things Greg and I used to do. In the winter, when I was in 7th grade, I was outside sledding and throwing snowballs with my friends. This part I remember well. We were at a large hill, trying to see who could go the fastest and bragging about how good we were at sledding. It was one of the moments you never forget. All of us were having fun until I saw him, Greg. He was standing at the bottom of the slope, shivering in the cold, looking at me with sad eyes. I blinked multiple times, trying to clear the images of him from my mind as I was shocked to see him again. He wouldn't leave, he just stood there, his expression turning angrier the longer I looked at him. I followed his gaze as he stared at my friends with hatred. I looked back to him and he slowly vanished. Although I no longer saw Greg for the rest of 7th grade, I did not stop thinking about him that day. His face was imprinted in my mind, almost haunting me. I decided I could get rid of my remorse by completely cutting myself from Greg. I destroyed pictures and things I'd written about him. The only thing I could not destroy was my memories of him. I thought about Greg less and went on with my life. In my freshman year of high school, I started to see Greg again. No longer the image I had of him as a child. His face was sunken and there was no emotion in his eyes. I started seeing him sitting down in my classroom, at my lunch table. The one strange thing was that no one would sit where he was or walk where he walked. It was almost like he was a real person. He showed up wherever I was, always following me. It wasn't too noticeable, but it was obvious he was still there. The more we saw each other, the more I noticed his change in expression. He became angrier and started showing up in unexpected places, scaring me to the point that I couldn't sleep. And when I did, he would be there, watching me. He began to show up more often in more places. I started sleeping less, do worse in school, and drifted from my friends. My parents tried to figure out what was happening to me, but couldn't. This led to counselling and later on visits from doctors, all of whom couldn't figure out what was happening. I was declared insane and taken to a mental institute where Greg would stare at me for hours, driving me further insane. I became very anxious, seeing images of Greg threatening to kill me. I started to talk to Greg, asking why he was doing this and what was making him so angry, but he wouldn't respond. Then, finally, he started to repeat 4 words. "Please don't leave me." Each time he said it, he got louder until he was screaming, his face contorting into a deep, evil smile. This is my last day. As I finish recording this, I will end my torment and get rid of Greg forever. My advice to you is, never forget them.